For 216 years, humanity had been a full member of the Meridian Accord. No fleet had ever attacked them. No empire had tried to absorb them. No pirate faction had even tested their borders. Their military was small. Their colonies were spread thin. Their warships were old. By every metric, the galaxy understood they should have been easy prey, and yet they had never been touched. The question sat in every diplomatic room for 2 centuries until one Vethely delegate finally asked it out loud. The question had been sitting in the room for 200 years before anyone finally asked it out loud. The Meridian Accord was one of those diplomatic institutions that existed because it was more convenient than the alternatives, a neutral station floating between 4 territorial boundaries, owned by no one and used by everyone. The kind of place where the ceiling was made of transparent panels and the stars were visible through them at all hours, and delegates from 14 species ate food they couldn't identify and pretended, with varying degrees of skill, to enjoy each other's company. Ambassador Kira Celine had been humanity's representative at the Accord for 9 years. She was good at the pretending. She was good at most things that required patience and a face that revealed nothing, which was, she had always thought, either the most diplomatic quality a person could possess or the loneliest, depending on the day. She was standing near the observation window, 3 fingers wrapped around a glass of something pale and faintly luminescent that she had not touched in 40 minutes. When the Vethely delegate found her, Vethely were tall, feathered along the collar and forearms, with the particular ease of a species that had not lost a significant conflict in 4 centuries. This one was young, which for Vethely meant she had not yet learned to conceal what she was thinking. Her name was Lyra, she said. Ambassador Celine, I have been studying your species quite thoroughly. Celine said, that's very kind of you. Lyra said, it was not kindness, it was professional curiosity. She tilted her head, the way Vethely did before they said something they had been holding back. Your people have been members of this accord for 216 years. In that time, no fleet, no empire, no pirate faction, no rogue coalition has made a serious military move against Earth or any human settlement. Not one. Celine looked at her. She was quiet. Your military budget, Lyra continued, is smaller than the merchant guild of 3 outer systems. Your registered warships are old. Your colonies are spread thin. By every metric available to me, your species should have been raided, absorbed, or made a protectorate of something larger at least a century ago. She paused. And yet you have not been, so I would like to ask you directly why. Around them, several delegates who had been in the middle of their own conversations had gone carefully still. Celine took the first sip of her drink. It was the question everyone in the room had wanted answered for 200 years. No one else had had the nerve to say it. She looked at Lyra for a long moment. That, she said, is a very good question. She did not answer it. Not then. She did not yet know that the answer was going to be relevant in approximately 40 hours. The flag arrived on a Tuesday. Celine was in her quarters on the residential ring, having a cup of tea she actually intended to drink, when her communications terminal produced a soft chime and the words Earth Defense Coordination Priority Green appeared on the screen. She read the message. It was short. She preferred short. A Dvati scout, fleet 7 vessels, no filed approach notice. No open communications channel had altered course in the outer lanes approximately 16 hours ago. The new heading was consistent with an approach to the Callaway system, humanity's 3rd largest colonial settlement, 320,000 people, farmers, engineers, 3 universities, good land, and a mild star. The fleet had not announced itself. It had simply turned and moved, steadily and without explanation, toward a place where human beings lived. Celine sat with the message for a few minutes. She was not the kind of person who made decisions quickly, and she was not the kind of person who made them slowly. She made them when she had enough to decide with, and she had enough. She sent a reply to Earth Defense Coordination. 4 words, we see them. Good. Then she went to find Lyra. The Vethely delegate was in the observation lounge, which was quiet at that hour. Just the slow rotation of the station and the endless field of stars beyond the glass. Celine sat across from her without being invited. She put her hands flat on the table. I am ready, she said, to begin answering your question. Lyra looked at her with those steady pale eyes. Something has happened. Something is happening. Yes. Lyra was quiet. Then carefully, the Dvati Celine neither confirmed nor denied. She did not need to. Lyra was sharp. She said, I am going to tell you some things about my people that are not in any file you have read. And when I am finished, I think the question you asked me at the reception will have a different answer than the one you were expecting. Lyra said, all right. So Celine told her, not the diplomatic summary, the real version. She told her about Earth, about a species that had never had a clean unification event, that had fractured and rebuilt and fractured again, that had invented weapons specifically designed to end each other and used those weapons and then rebuilt from what remained, that had dropped the most destructive things it had ever made on its own cities and had not collapsed, that had kept going and rebuilt and kept building, and was still here. Every other species in the Accord, she said, had at some point reached a moment where the external pressure resolved, where cooperation became obviously more efficient than conflict, where things became, broadly speaking, safe. Humans never had that moment, she said. Because the difficulty was never primarily external, it came from us. And so we never stopped preparing, because what we were preparing for was simply the possibility that tomorrow might be as hard as yesterday. Lyra was very still. Celine said, there is something that every species in that accord has misunderstood about us. They look at our history and they see chaos. They see a species that nearly destroyed itself several times over, and they conclude that we are dangerous the way a broken machine is dangerous unpredictably, accidentally. And that is wrong. Lyra said, that is incomplete. Celine said, we are dangerous the way a person is dangerous when they have been in enough difficult situations that they have stopped being surprised by them. We are not reckless. We are not suicidal. We are simply not intimidated by the prospect of things becoming very bad. Because things have been very bad before, and we are still here. She paused. 40 years after first contact with this accord, she said, the major governments of Earth made a quiet agreement. Not a military treaty. Not a defense pact. Something simpler. Lyra waited. They decided, Celine said, not to show anything. Not to deploy their biggest ships to the borders. Not to demonstrate their capability the way every other species instinctively did when they felt watched. They decided to let everyone assume they already understood us. There is a difference, she added, between a species that is hiding and a species that lets you believe you have seen everything. One of those is a strategy. The other is a way of life. Lyra looked at the table, then she looked up. The Dvati fleet is about to find out what happens when that assumption is tested. Celine said nothing. She didn't need to. The news reached the accord before breakfast. 7 Dvati vessels had crossed the outer boundary marker of the Callaway approach corridor at 0340 station time. Then they stopped. They were sitting in open space, 40,000 kilometers inside the corridor. Fully operational, no distress signals, no visible damage, not responding to communication requests. They were also, per the Conclave observer vessel that had been running a routine scan of the system, unable to engage their jump drives. Every attempt, and they had made 9 of them in 40 minutes, had failed. Something was suppressing their jump capability across a radius that the observer's instruments could not fully measure. The field was centered on the colony itself. The Chadrani technical delegate in the observation suite, who had spent 60 years developing jump suppression research that had never managed more than a few hundred meters of effective range, was reading the sensor data with an expression that Celine would have described, if she had been in a more unkind mood, as personally affronted. Lyra found her near the central display. Everything in that system, she said quietly, that a human built. She stopped, started again. The weather satellite network is producing targeting lock signatures. Yes. The atmospheric monitoring stations. Yes. She turned to look at Celine. Your colonists are farmers. Celine watched the feed. 320,000 people were waking up and beginning their day, buying bread from the bakery on the main square of the primary settlement. The colony scan was showing all of it, and it was also showing that approximately a third of adult colonists were carrying personal weapons rated for use against armored targets, and that roughly a fifth held advanced threat certifications, and that approximately every human-built structure in the system had been built, quietly and without drama, with the understanding that it might one day need to do more than its stated function. Lyra read the scan results slowly. These are civilians, she said. Celine said. Yes, a third of them are carrying. It's a long walk between settlements, Celine said. Standard on most colony worlds. Lyra was quiet. On the display, a Dvati vessel attempted to move laterally. A cascade of lock indicators appeared around it like a net drawing tight. The ship returned to its original position. Lyra said, every human-built object in that system is armed. Celine said, that is an oversimplification, but it is not inaccurate. The large vessel appeared at 0847, decloaked approximately 200 meters off the port side of the Dvati flagship, and it was larger than anything in the fleet by a margin that required the observer systems to recalibrate their mass estimates. It had no visible weapons. It simply appeared as if it had always been there and had simply chosen this particular moment to be seen. The observation suite went silent. Lyra said very quietly, how many of those do you have? Celine watched the display. Thessaly, she said, using the Vethely name as she had come to do. That is exactly the right question. A communications channel opened. It belonged to someone on Callaway, a duty officer on the morning shift, someone who had drawn the short straw and was now speaking to a Dvati fleet that had come to see what humanity was made of. The voice was calm, conversational, the voice of a person for whom this was, professionally speaking, a routine Tuesday. You are in the wrong lane, the voice said. Do you need directions? The Dvati fleet did not respond. After 47 seconds, the lead vessel began, very slowly, to turn around. No shots were fired. There were no casualties. 7 ships moved in silence back the way they had come, across the outer boundary marker, and away into the dark. Celine turned from the display and went back to her quarters and ate breakfast. Owen, her aide, looked considerably more relaxed than he had an hour earlier. He did not ask questions. He made himself useful and quiet, which was what she valued most about him. Later, through official channels, she received the intercepted Dvati transmission. It was brief. It was addressed from their fleet commander to Home Command, that said, Do not engage the humans. We do not know what we would find. She read it once, folded it, put it in her desk. She met Lyra in the corridor after the coalition resolution failed, the measure that would have required humanity to formally document its capabilities, killed by 7 votes, and by the memory of the morning's events. The Vethali delegate looked different than she had at the reception 3 nights ago. The easy certainty had been replaced by something more complex, not afraid, but caring more than before. I have been thinking, Lyra said, about everything you told me. I think I was asking the wrong question from the beginning. She looked at Celine. I asked why no one attacks you, but the real question is what happens inside your species when someone does. Not to them. What happens to you? Celine looked at her for a long moment. We win, she said. Yes, I understand that now. Lyra was quiet. But who are you after? It was, Celine thought, the most honest question anyone had asked her in a long time. The question she had been sitting with since the night before, alone in her quiet quarters, listening to the hum of the station. That, she said, is something we think about. Good, Lyra said. I am glad you think about it. They stood in the corridor while the station turned slowly around them, the way it always did, and delegates moved past in their small groups, carrying the ordinary traffic of a diplomatic morning that had not, in the end, become a catastrophe. Celine walked back to the observation window and looked at the stars. Out there, the Dvati fleet was heading home. Its commander was writing a report that would be read by people who would draw very careful conclusions. And those conclusions would include a particular reluctance. The reluctance of someone who has looked at something they cannot measure and decided, wisely, not to press against it. Out there on Callaway, 320,000 people were finishing their day. The farmers were coming in from the fields, the children were coming home. The bakery had presumably sold everything it made that morning and was getting ready to make more. They had not been told, most of them, that anything had happened. They had simply lived their day. And somewhere in the background of that day, in the systems that ran quietly beneath everything, the same readiness that had always been there had done what it was built to do, and then returned to its waiting. Farmers, teachers, engineers, parents, students, bakers, also other things. Because they came from a place and a people who had learned, long before the stars, that those two facts did not have to be in conflict. And for the first time in 216 years of membership in this accord, the galaxy understood, not from a demonstration, not from a declaration, but from a fleet that turned around in silence what it truly meant to be human. Not the absence of war. Not the absence of fear. The presence of something older and harder than either. The readiness of a species that had never found a reason to stop being ready, and had carried that weight so long it had forgotten it was weight at all. 3 weeks later, Celine received a second communication. Not from Earth Defense Coordination. Not from the Conclave Secretariat. From an address she did not recognize. Routed through a relay chain that her system spent 11 minutes tracing before returning a location that made her set down her coffee. The Dvati home system. The message was from a researcher, not a military officer, not a government representative, an academic, a historian, attached to one of the Dvati universities, who had been compiling a study of Conclave member species for 12 years. She had, the researcher explained, been given access to her fleet commander's full debrief. Not the official report, the actual debrief, the one not filed with the Conclave. She had read it, and she had spent 3 weeks trying to decide whether to send what she was about to send. Attached was a single document, the fleet commander's raw notes from the moment his jump drives had failed. Not the formal account. The first draft thinking, written in the way a person writes when they are processing something and not yet editing themselves. Celine read it. Halfway through, she stopped. She read it again from the beginning. The commander had not simply decided to turn around because the situation was tactically untenable. He had turned around because of something the scanning data showed him in 47 seconds before his lead vessel began to move. Something that was not in any sensor report she had received. Something that the Conclave observers' instruments had not been positioned to catch. The colony on Callaway, the 320,000 farmers and engineers and bakers had not simply armed their infrastructure. The scan had shown, in that 47-second window, a pattern in the colony's power grid that the commander's technical team had spent 20 minutes analyzing before they understood what they were looking at. The colony had not been defending that it had been powering up, not the passive systems that had trapped the fleet, something else. Something that had begun the slow, patient initialization sequence of a weapon type that the Dvati technical team recognized because they had spent 40 years trying to build one and had never succeeded. The initialization had stopped the moment the lead vessel began its turn, powered down, returned to baseline, as if someone had noted the movement and decided calmly, without drama, without any visible urgency, that it was no longer necessary. The commander's note, in the Dvati language that Celine read fluently, said this: "They did not stop us because we were outmatched. They stopped us because they decided to. Those are not the same thing. I do not know what they would have done if we had not turned. I do not intend to find out. More importantly, I do not believe they wanted us to find out." The restraint was deliberate. The restraint was the message. Celine sat with the document for a long time. Then she thought about Lyra's question. The one she had answered honestly. "Who are you after?" she had said. "That is something we think about." She had believed it when she said it. She thought about the duty officer on Callaway, on a Tuesday morning, in a calm voice, asking a fleet of warships if they needed directions. She thought about the weapon that had begun to power up and then quietly, without announcement, stood down. She thought about the thing Yunvil had said, the oldest delegate in the Accord, who had been watching humanity for 2 centuries. "Your piece is the piece of something that has already learned to live with the worst." She looked at the document on her screen. The restraint was the message. She closed the file. She sat in her quiet quarters for a long time. She thought about all the things humanity had built into the background of its ordinary days, and what it meant that the most important of those things was not the weapon that could power up. It was the person who decided when not to use it. We were not ready because we had weapons. We were ready because we had learned, across 10,000 years of choosing badly and living with the consequences, when to use them. And the galaxy, she thought, would spend the next century trying to understand if that was something to fear or something to trust. The answer, she suspected, was both. It had always been both. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the most powerful thing about humanity was never the weapon in the room, but the hand that decided to lower it, subscribe. There are more human stories from the stars, and in every one of them, we were always more than anyone expected.